Hi, I'm in the RM of Rosser with Chris Manchur, agronomy specialist with the Canola Council of Canada. We're in a canola field, Chris. It's in the cabbaging stage, as you pointed out, but what I'd like to talk to you a little bit about today is fungicides in canola, and what are they generally protecting against when they get to that stage?
Yeah, so right now, we're not quite seeing the bolting happening just yet in this field, but Sclerotinia is going to be on my mind when we're starting to think about scouting and then also look into the forecast, what's going to be happening in the future. Now, Sclerotinia is one of our top canola pathogens. It can rob, up to half of your yield.
Oh, wow.
So we definitely want to be aware of what's going on now, leading up to the bolting phase and then into flowering.
So Chris, what is the current situation of Sclerotinia on the prairies or just in Manitoba in general?
Yeah, so what we've seen kind of, in 2022, 2023, and a little bit before that too, it was fairly dry. So Sclerotinia wasn't really a major issue for a lot of growers. However, in 2024, we finally start to see that needle kind of tick back up in terms of how many fields were infected. The provincial disease survey is showing us that we definitely see some infection out there. But it was also very spotty, even in the fields too, depending on, what moisture was available. Manitoba, generally being a wetter province, we saw a little bit more infection, but again, it is very regionally dependent.
Okay. Now, how does the Canola Council of Canada kind of monitor the Sclerotinia development in particular areas in the provinces?
Yeah, so with the Canola Council, our crop production innovation team of agronomy specialists are located across the prairies. And so we continuously communicate with agronomists and growers and others around to accurately assess how much the canola is growing, coming along, and then also understanding, what are the weather patterns, conditions, and then figuring out if there are particular areas that are going to be at higher risk, and then be able to communicate that in our resources and communications, say like Canola Watch, to actually show that maybe you should get out into your field and start scouting a little bit more.
Right. Now, is there anything a grower can do at the planting stage to maybe help prevent the development of Sclerotinia, like in terms of plant density in their field? What does that look like?
Yeah, so a lot of decisions throughout our growing season happen at seeding, right? And so when we're thinking about canola, we have that optimal target plant stand of about 5 to 8 plants per square foot. And that works twofold, that we don't want that competition within the plants, but also we want a uniform plant stand that doesn't provide too conducive of an environment for Sclerotinia to infect. And the reason why I say that is because we got to think about kind of the climate that we're in right now. And then there's also going to be a microclimate that's happening underneath the canopy. And so right now, we're starting to see that develop now that the canola is kind of cabbaging. It's getting into bolting probably in a few days by now. And so when we're seeing, what is going to be the impact when we have precipitation, when the rains are starting to come down, the soil moisture starts to be more consistent, that's going to really influence essentially the germination of the Sclerotinia. And if we have a really dense canopy, that's going to maintain these conditions more favorably throughout the year or throughout the growing season. And we know that humidity in these areas is strongly correlated to Sclerotinia infection.
Okay. So the economic risk that Sclerotinia poses, what type of return on investment can growers expect or hope for, I guess, when it comes to a fungicide treatment?
Yeah, the decision to spray or not to spray is a very, very important one, especially, when we said earlier that Sclerotinia can rob a lot of yield. Now, what we see currently is that, we have kind of a good estimate in terms of what it costs per acre to apply a fungicide. Both the labor, the cost of the product, or contracting out with a spray plane or a ground sprayer as well. So now that we have that kind of cost there, now we have to also think about what is the cost of the loss. And so we do have these tools available through our Canola Calculator website where you can input this information. And what we kind of find is that if you have about 1 in every 10 plants infected by Sclerotinia, that equals to about a 5% yield loss. Now, if we're targeting, about a 50 bushel per acre crop, that usually pays for that fungicide. That's about maybe 2 and a bit bushels. So depending on the market prices and all that, now you have a kind of a good idea what your threshold is going to be like and whether that you're going to actually get a return on investment on that crop.
Okay. Now, we're far from it at this stage for spraying, but when it does come time to consider spraying, what should growers be be anticipating, be looking for? What signs should they be looking for, I guess?
So for me, it's going to be primarily about the environment. For Sclerotinia, this is a pathogen that strongly adheres to that disease triangle where we have the susceptible host, which is our canola, which there are some tolerant cultivars, but the majority are to some degree susceptible. And then we also have the presence of the pathogen, which we can scout and find these little fruiting structures called apothecia. Now those are about dime size, so you really have to be scouting and getting on your hands and knees to find them. But the most important part is that environment, because we need that moisture, we need the humidity, we need the soil moisture present to actually germinate that Sclerotinia and then cause that infection on the petals. And so what I'm looking for leading into the flowering, starting at the bolting phase and leading and getting into that, is what is my forecast? How much precipitation have I had? And not only how much precipitation, but is it also sustained? Because if we're having a massive thunderstorm that drops maybe an inch or two and then it dries up after, your risk is going to be less than if we're having continuously moist, wet days from long rains, perfect conditions for a fungus to thrive in.
Yeah,
exactly.
For sure.
Yeah.
So Chris, how does Sclerotinia actually get spread from field to field? Because there's only present in the crop at certain times of the year, and that's when potential infection can occur and spread to other fields. How does that work?
Yeah, so sclerotia kind of resides in the soil of sclerotia. When it germinates, it produces mushroom fruiting structures. And then these structures produce these spores that they can spread from field to field.
Okay.
These are the infectious agents that then infect the petals. And then when they drop down, they get into the crooks of the stems, land on leaves, and then that's where the yield loss happens. And so when these spores get carried up by the wind, they can infect neighboring fields. They can affect across a field as well. And so you may not have as much of a risk in your immediate field, depending on rotation, but we also know Sclerotinia is present across the prairies.
Right.
And so if the conditions are right, you can still get infection.
Okay. So Chris, when it comes time to spray, what is the best type of fungicide timing to look for?
Yeah, so first off, you want to kind of follow the label to all your fungicides. Now, the most common label for most fungicides is 20 to 50% bloom.
Okay.
And so we need to recognize that fungicides are a protective, not a curative option, because once it gets into the plant, it's already doing its job, causing yield loss. And so when you're thinking about when you need to time, you need to get onto your fields, scouting for the appropriate flowering. And so we have resources available to show you what the current stages are, what 20% looks like, what 50% looks like. Now, not only that, but another important thing to consider is if you're contracting out your spray application. Because if you're contracting out, say, a sprayer plane, and you want to get into the queue, you need to figure out, okay, when are they likely to spray into your field? And then contract that out in ahead, because if you spray too late, you're going to be missing some of that, because
Right.
You want to get that fungicide covering as many petals as possible.
Well, Chris, thanks very much for meeting with me out here today. Have a great day. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much as well.